Our ancestors tried to connect with us in all sorts of ways, and my experience with an edible was just one of them. And so that's what we're digging into today. Hi, my name is Trina Parham, and I am a spiritual mentor and guide for Black and Brown women. And today we're talking about how an edible helped me connect with my ancestors and just the ways that we connect with our ancestors and why. So if that sounds good to you, you're in the right place. I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited to tell this story in full. I've told it to different people and sort of snippets here and there, but I wanted to talk about this story. And before I get into it, if this is something that you know you're looking for some support in your spiritual life and in your world and looking for more meaning, fulfillment, and what does this all mean, I invite you to connect with me in a consultation call with me. It's about 30 minutes. I do virtual 2-hour retreats with folks where we dive in and we do some ceremony and ritual and some ancestral connecting and all of that stuff. So if that's something that you're into, link is below this video if you want to chat and see how I can support you with that. Now, so let's get into this story. So before I tell you all the details of this edible experience, there's some things that I want to share. So I'm sorry, I'm so hot in this room. I have my fan on, but I'm still hot. Um, anyway, so here's what happened. So again, so before I get into this story, um, I have been connecting and working with my ancestors for years. And this edible experience, at least this first one that I had in the story I'm talking about, happened last summer. So we're talking 2024. So before 2024, I've been, creating ancestral altars and doing all sorts of things to just connect with my ancestors in many ways over the years. And so, prior to that experience, I mean, I would say even 10 years before that, I was, just connecting, just talking to my folks, in the ways that I do. And so this is something that I've been doing. Also, I come from a very large family, and so a very large extended family. And so I grew up, very connected to my roots, to my family history, to my ancestors in that way, to my relatives, to my older relatives, to my elders. So that is a big part of my life and has always been a big part of my life. And I'm telling you all of this because I think that we all connect with our ancestors in different ways. And so I want to lay this foundation for my experience because I don't think that everyone's going to have the same experience as mine. But I do believe that my background and my connection to my family and all of that really dovetails into why they showed up for me the way that they did. And so that's why I'm giving all of this background. The second thing is I've always had very vivid dreams. This sort of my dreams are often prophetic. My dreams can be healing. My dreams are just very, very vivid. Sometimes I lucid dream. I have all sorts of different kinds of dreams, and I have since I was a kid. And it's a family trait. And so I think because of that, all of these things together, it doesn't take much for me to have, a crazy dream or experience or something like that. So that's important to name. Also, I don't take edibles that often. And so, I mean, rarely. And so, the fact that this happened, it really stood out to me. So with that background, now I'll tell you about this story. And I think as I go, one thing that I would encourage you to think about is about your history with your ancestors and with your family, because I think there's a lot of information in there about how you can connect with your ancestors in the way that you want. And I will say that, there are a lot of things in my family that didn't go well or that I didn't think was good. And so, there was a lot of, there was some sexual abuse in my family. There were some other things that went on that, all families have their thing. And so, it was difficult for me to connect with my ancestors in the beginning because I think I blamed them for some things, and I had to learn how to talk to them, how to work with them, and all of that. And I think what really moved my ancestral journey and connection forward was when my mom died. And so my mom died almost 7 years ago now. And so even though I had other relatives, like my grandma and other folks in my life who I was close to, losing my mom was a big deal for me. And I think that was another thing that caused me to connect with my ancestors. But again, for you, think about the things in your life that can help you connect. And I'll talk more about ways to begin doing that in a minute. So okay, so laying all of that foundation again. So my mom passed away almost 7 years ago, and I've been connecting with her in small ways. I found it after she died. I found it really hard to connect with her, but I had things like my tarot cloth that I use to read tarot is a scarf of hers. I have some of her jewelry and different things like that, and of course, lots of pictures and things like that. But I found it really hard to connect with her, and every time I would dream of her, she seemed upset or really sad or depressed, and so it took me a while to not have that experience with her. When I connected with her, in my dreams or in any other way. So let me take you back to this was a June 2024, and just a regular summer day, summer night, and I decided to take an edible, and I hadn't had one for a couple years, maybe not a couple years, um, maybe since the previous summer even. So I decided to do this, and I took it right before bed. So usually if I take an edible, I'll do it like earlier in the day because I know I've taken them before where I've had really crazy dreams. So I try to avoid taking them, before bed because I'm like, oh, my dreams are going to be off the chain. I'm not going to be able to sleep, whatever. But for some reason, I decided, to take it before bed. Now, another key to this, and this will make sense the more as I get into this story. I am not an artist, like by any stretch of the imagination, and I am not exaggerating. But since probably my mid 20s, I have painted. I've been painting, I've been drawing, I've been coloring, I've been doing all sorts of ways to express myself, artistically. And I love playing in paint. Again, I'm not good at it, but I, it's something that I do. So that will tie into this whole story in a minute. Okay. So back to the story. So I took this edible and I started falling asleep. And all of a sudden I see this image of a building in France. And I'm like, it looked almost like a barn. It was a barn, but it had like black and white windows on it. That was like the first thing that I saw. And so I got up and I was like, I need to draw this. I need to write this down and I need to just get this on paper. So that's what I did. And I told my partner, I was like, hey, can you give me some paper? Like, I need to write this down. And so he did. And I just started drawing this picture of what I saw. And then all of a sudden, it was like I was hearing my mom's voice. Like I was seeing her, and I kept seeing her as like a Pepsi machine that looked like an old school Pepsi machine that looked like a but was like almost in the shape of a crayon. And what's interesting about this, and this is where I think it's important to know your ancestors and know your people, because the way they show up in the messages that they send, I feel like it's going to be unique to you. And so when I was growing up, when I was little, my mom loved Pepsi and she loved double mint gum. And so I kept seeing these images of these, and by old school Pepsi machines, I'm talking like late 70s, early 80s. And so if you remember what those Pepsi machines look like, I kept seeing that image, but it turned into, like I said, it turned into a crayon. And it was all these different colors. And that was my first time like really connecting with my mother. And so, anyway, so I started getting all these images of these Pepsi machines in different colors. And then my grandma came to me, my mom's mom, and she said, she was worried about me and she wanted to check and see how I was doing. And then I just started seeing all these balloons and all this stuff, and they were both really happy to talk to me and to connect with me. And Side note, whatever you believe about these sorts of experiences, if you think the ancestral realm or the other realm is real or not, it actually doesn't even matter whether it's yourself and something that you create in your mind, or if it's something that really is otherworldly. Actually doesn't even matter. Regardless, it's still a connection as far as I'm concerned. That's the way that I see it. So, so whether this was me comforting myself or, my mom really connecting with me, which I believe her soul and spirit were connecting with me. But I think, I just wanted to throw that in there. So anyway, I started just drawing all of these pictures and all of these things that represented, my mom. And it was just like her and I were just having this conversation, and my grandma too. And so it was like a really beautiful experience. And there's all sorts of things that happened and things that she said that I was just vigorously writing down all these notes and all these things that she was saying to me. And the same with my grandma, like just hearing her, voice, seeing her face, and all of the things that she was telling me. And so I proceeded to just draw different things that they had brought up to me. And so then I laid down again and I got up again, and then all of a sudden, all of these ancestors of mine started showing up. And and I mean ancestors that I knew, ancestors that I didn't know, and the ones that I did know, they were telling me really funny stories. And so over the course of an hour, maybe a little bit longer, I was sitting in the middle of my bed just taking notes, cracking up, laughing to myself. And it felt like a family reunion. It felt like, and my family was always known for having, big parties and with lots of food and just jokes and music and just laughter and family reunions and things like that. Those are things that my family had always done. And so this experience was very much like that. And I mean, I had ancestors from, I mean, I'm talking probably centuries back that came to visit, and even new ancestors, because I had a relative that had passed away the week before who had come to visit me to give me a message to pass along. And so it was just this really beautiful experience of connecting with my ancestors. And and again, it's so hard to just explain all the personal things and the details that they talked about and that they knew. Again, a lot of that stuff is just personal that I'm not going to share publicly, but it was a really beautiful, beautiful moment. And what I ended up left with, I mean, I must have had, I don't know, maybe 40 pages of, maybe more, of unlined paper with just notes and drawings and all sorts of things. And a big thing that came out of that experience was a lot of my ancestors who I knew, and some I didn't, but they one of the instructions that they gave me was to create a scroll. And so to create a scroll with all their names on it. And the thing that came out of it, where the drawing comes in, is they each came to me with their own image. Like each one of them, so the way my mom's image was a Pepsi machine, my grandma's was something else, like they all came to me with a different image. And so I and some of them were drawings, some of them wanted physical things made. My dad's mom came and she wanted a doll made of her, which I'm almost finished with actually. And so they've just come to me with these different things that they were saying, hey, these are things we want you to create to connect with us and tell these stories about us. And so that's what I started to do. And of course, I started with my mother. She was the image that was just the most palpable and powerful for me. The other thing, I mean, there were all sorts of things that came up during this ancestral channeling session. They gave me messages about myself. I was channeling, like animal ancestors. I mean, all sorts of like connections. They shared a lot with me about myself on my journey and things that I needed to remember and think about and plan for. And it was just the most warming, beautiful connection experience. And like I said, I've always had really intense dreams. And so I often will dream about my family and relatives and things like that. I always have. And sometimes in those dreams, it's not always a pleasant dream. It's a feeling that they have or that they've had. Maybe it's something that they were sad about or upset about, or sometimes they're really great dreams. But it's often a mixed bag. But this experience was so incredibly positive and heartwarming. And like I said, just the months leading up to that, I'd been having a really hard time, and it was just, how life gets. So, and some things that I wasn't sure about, and all of that stuff. And so, just to have them come to me in the way that they did at the time that they did, it meant the world to me. It really did. And so I took it upon myself as I was going through these notes and everything that they shared with me to start creating, the things that they shared. And so I'll just show you a couple of images that I created for my mom. Like this is one of the images that I created for her. As you can see, this is like that double mint gum Pepsi machine that's shaped like a crayon. And these were the balloons that they came to me with. Um, Here's another one that I created. You can see that. Um, and so it was just different images of Pepsi machines. And so I'm just looking through my sketchbook here. Um, but as you can see that. Um, And so there's all sorts of images in here that I drew, thinking about my mother, um, and I just made them in different colors, and all the colors that came to me. That's what I created. And so I'm in the process of I made my scroll, I made my family scroll, which I won't show because it has names on there and things like that. Um, but anyway, I created my family scroll. I created all the images of my mom as the Pepsi Crayola image, and I started making the doll for my dad's mom. Excuse me. Mm, and and then I have a series of others things that I'm going to be making. And so one of the things that came also, my great aunt, she'll be the next one that I make, was a stole. She used to wear a mink stole all the time. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be making, in some sort of mixed media, probably, or drawing. I don't know. Um, but I just wanted to share a little bit so you could get a picture of what I'm talking about, because I'm talking about all these images and it's like, what exactly do you mean? So that was that experience. And since then, I've had I've had another session where I've channeled ancestors and things like that. That was this year. This was probably about maybe 3 months ago. And so a similar experience, but not as intense as that first one. And so I really took that. I mean that experience stayed with me, and it's still with me almost a year later. And it means something to me to get all of these things created. I don't know what I'll do with all of it other than creating it for myself. And it's a way for me to connect personally to my ancestors, to my lineage. It's something that has value to me. And I think that what I've learned from this experience, and that I think is really important for other people, is if you desire to connect to your ancestors, that I think you should. So the way that I started was very simple. I mean, it was really just talking to them, talking to them like I would talk to anybody else, and just creating that moment, um, in time to just spend with them and to connect with them, and do it. The one thing that I can say that I've learned, because people, there's lots of books out there about ancestral connection and veneration and things like that. Oh, I want to say just quickly, there's a difference between ancestor worship and veneration, to me, it's not, you don't worship them, you don't like God or anything like that. To me, it's more about just connecting, and they can guide you, they can give you comfort and warmth, and especially if you're struggling or having a difficult time, I feel like they really can bring you a lot of healing. And I forget where I was going to go with that, but so I think that's important just to name. So this is not like you praying to them like you pray to God. That's not how they work. But there's a lot of resources out there for people that teach you how to, just to start connecting with your ancestors. And I think some of those are good. There's a book by Louisa Tish called Jambalaya. And I really love Yayi Tish, and she has some really good insights on connecting with the ancestors. And I've talked to other folks about it. And I have my own spiritual mentor that I've known and worked with for probably 15 years at this point. And so I really started that connection process with her, sort of just telling me just generally what I needed to do. And what I've learned is everyone has a different way of doing it. I think there's some very basic tools and techniques, but for the most part, it's going to be different. So, I come from a very Christian, Baptist family. And so, my grandma was Pentecostal, but for the most part, we grew up Baptist. And so there are times when I connect, even though I don't identify as a Christian anymore, I don't go to church anymore. I consider myself very much culturally Christian. And there are some elements of Christianity that I believe are very cultural. And so there are times when I connect to my ancestors when they want me to sing hymns, or there's hymns that come up. There's songs that we used to sing together. There's all kinds of music. There's different things that they want that are, again, are very cultural. I think sometimes people, so for example, my family weren't big drinkers. So, like, a lot of times people will tell you, to pour a libation, or to, you know, give your ancestors rum or things like that. Well, my people didn't really drink, especially not my immediate relatives. There were some that did, but for the most part, my family, weren't big drinkers. So that's not something that I offer them. And so I just use that as an example. So I think it's important to know your family, and to know your roots, and to know your history. Now, I think one of the things that can get really complicated with ancestral connection is if there are people that you are upset with in your lineage, or if there are people who did things that you didn't like, or that hurt you in some way, or whatever. One of the things that I always say when I connect to my folks is I want to connect to my well ancestors and my ancestors who made me well. And that is something that is important to me. Now, I know there are other people who say even if they aren't well, they have things to share with you and teach you, and that's probably true. I'm saying that's not what I do, but you can do it however you want to do it. But I do think it's important to go into those times when you connect to your ancestral altar. And part of the work that I do with folks, if you want to come into a virtual retreat with me, is I can show you how to build your own ancestral altar and make that connection a little more personally, if that's something that you're interested in. Um, but I think that you have to, you connect in a way that makes the most sense for you, and you do the things that make the most sense. But if you have found yourself, realizing that there's a lot of hurt there, or maybe you were adopted, or maybe there, it's a mess. Look, as much as I love my ancestors, they were messy. Some of them were really messy. Some of it was just messy. That's life. And so, but I think you have to, and especially if you were directly impacted, and even not, there are some things that are passed down through our mother line or our father line that get to us, that we need to unpack, and we need to be able to work through. And I think, so part of that for me was being very honest with them. If there are things about them that I didn't respect, or I didn't like, or hey, why am I dealing with this? Why is our family struggling with that? To bring it up, to talk about it, to get it out. And so, you know, whether that is journaling, whether that's just expressing yourself verbally, whether that's drawing pictures, painting, whatever you want to do, I think it's important to go there because I think we have this idea that our ancestors are perfect or were perfect. And it's just not true. Or that because now that they're an ancestor, that whatever hurt they might have caused you is it's gone away, like it doesn't mean anything. And that's not true. And I think, even in my relationship with my mother, we didn't have the perfect relationship. There are things about our relationship and things about her that really upset me and really bothered me. And I also loved her tremendously. And so, those are things that I had to work through. Those are things that I had to express. And so I think that's really important when you connect with your ancestors, that it's not all perfect. Now, one thing that I do think is different for me, I know some people say that ancestors are, they can grow and they can change. That is not a personal belief that I have. I believe once you enter the ancestral realm, that you are complete in a way. Now, I do think that there are people, mm, I do think there are ancestors that can not mean you well, or sometimes if they were hell on earth, they're hell in that realm too. And so you don't need to connect with those folks if you don't want to. And maybe I have a story about someone's ancestor that tried to connect with me, and I was like, absolutely not. So that's another story for another day. But yeah, I encourage you, if there are things that you need to get off your chest, or there are things that you need to say, that you do it. And this connection with your ancestors is something that you build over time. Like I said, before I even had this edible experience, which was last year, I've been working with my ancestors at least the previous 10 years, probably longer. And so that was the first real encounter that I had in that way. Now, I've dreamt about them in other times, and I've definitely been comforted by them. But that was the first time where I felt like, oh, they're giving me very clear messages on what to do. I shouldn't say that. I feel like they've given me messages before, but maybe I wasn't ready to hear them. I wasn't in the right place to really hear or do what they were asking me to do. I will say that because what's always come up for me with my ancestors is around storytelling, sharing stories, writing things down that they say. That's sort of been a through line and a theme, even if I avoided it, earlier on. So, but yeah, I encourage you to get in there, get in there and talk to them, connect with them, find out, you know, you maybe ask questions. And I feel like they can show you answers. They can they can reveal things. They can tell you what you need to focus on in terms of the family. If your family has certain issues that maybe you're dealing with, and it's a familial struggle or whatever it is, I feel like you can work through that. And if you are in a situation where your immediate family that has passed over, and their ancestors, if you don't necessarily want to connect with them, or you're not ready to for whatever reason, you can go back as far as you want. Like I said, I have ancestors from centuries ago that connected with me. And so I think you find your allies on that side, and you really get to know them and connect with them. And I think that the ancestors that you did know in this life can take on a different texture. Maybe they might be a little more loving or whatever it is, or maybe they're funnier. I don't know. Like they can be a little bit different. My people, I mean, the way they come to me as the best version. Excuse me, they come to me as the best version of themselves for the most part. Well, and not even the best version, but they're quirky. They're funny. They're funny. They're sharp tongued. They're serious. They are comforting. They're loving. Um, they're stern sometimes, but it's all in love. That's been my experience. And like I said, I know everyone has a different experience, but that has been mine. And so I'm just looking at my notes here. So what do we get out of connecting with our ancestors? Well, I know for me, like I said, a lot of it is just comforting. And I think when you lose somebody, particularly in the United States, we don't have a good relationship with death and dying. It is something that there's a lot of mystique around, there's a lot of fear around. And so, I grew up spending a lot of, speaking of ancestors, but um my grandma used to be she was an organist at her church, and she used to play at funerals. And when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with her. My parents worked a lot, and so I went to funerals. I went to a lot of funerals as a kid. Now, mind you, I had a lot of older relatives that passed away, so I went to a lot of funerals. But just going with my grandma, and let me tell you something, I was scared, and I would be sitting as far away from the casket as possible. You know, but I don't know. Over time, it's just something I've learned to work with. And I think, we have a lot of fear around that. And I think because of that, we fear that connection. And it's something that we need to really work on. But again, I think that our ancestors are there to comfort us, they're there to guide us, they're there to help us heal, and they do that in all sorts of ways. And I think it comes down to how we decide to connect with them and how often we do it and, things like that. But is there any magic involved or anything like that? I wouldn't necessarily call it that. I think it's just, these are your people. And I would say most of the time, they really do want what's best for you. And so connecting with them in the ways that you can, I think is a really powerful tool to use, whether you're healing something or you're in a transition or you just want to connect. I think especially if you lost someone really close to you, like a parent or something like that, where you really need that connection, you need that warmth, you need that heart healing, whatever it is. And I also think if you didn't make peace with them for some reason, or you didn't have peace with them in this life, that you can find that even though they're in the ancestral realm. I think that's possible as well. And so there's a lot there. There's a lot there that you can get out of that connection. Okay. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about? How to connect with your ancestors. So, um, the simplest thing that you can do is to create a surface, an altar, and you can um, put a glass of water on there and light a candle, and that suffices right there. You don't need anything fancy or anything like that. Sometimes if you have a picture of them, um, they always say, don't put pictures of anyone living on an ancestral altar, which I believe. So, the ancestor altar is for ancestors. So if you have a picture of an ancestor that you want to put on your altar, I would crop anyone who's still living, I would crop them out of it. Um, but or if there's something that reminds you of them or anything like that, you can put that on there, and that's all you need. You don't need anything fancy or anything like that. And as you go to the altar, you know, you just talk. You talk and connect. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be with it. And I believe the more that they'll share with you and they'll connect with you in a way that you understand. And I think that's the most important thing, is the way that you understand. Because, I think there's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ways that we can connect to our ancestors. People have a lot of thoughts on it. And I think ultimately, look, these are your people. These are your folks. And they are going to connect with you in a way that means something to you. And so everyone who's telling you about ancestral connection, they're not going to necessarily hit it all right because they're not you. They're not in your family line. They don't know your folks like you know them, or you. It's like they're coming to you. I share ancestors with lots of people, but they may show up differently for me than they do for somebody else. My nephew, he has in his house he has a picture of my mom and an old pair of her glasses, and that's the way that he is connected. And this brings me to another point, which is the way that, um, do what works best for you, but you're probably honoring your ancestors and you don't even realize it. And I think that's the thing that I think brings the most comfort is, if they wanted anything from us, it would be to be remembered and to be honored. And I believe that you could be honoring them in ways and you don't even think about it as ancestral connection or veneration. And like I said, it could be what I described with my nephew with the picture of my mom and her glasses. For some people, it can be, the family Bible that you pass along, generation to generation, you keep passing it along. Or it's pictures. You have photographs that go back 50, 75, 100 years, depending on your family. And you keep passing those photographs along. And in storytelling, telling stories, the funny stuff that they used to do, you know the stuff that my granny used to do, this thing where her fashion choices were all over the place. She could be, a diva one minute, and then the next minute she'd be wearing like a polka dot skirt with a striped blouse that just did not really go together, but it would just be funny. Like that was just her thing. And so when I'm around my family, we will tell stories like that, things that remind us, things that of them, things that make us laugh, things that probably upset us at the time, maybe, when we got a whoop it or something like that. But then it's like, then it's funny. It's funny now. And so, yeah, there are ways that you're probably connecting with them and you don't even realize it. So, yeah, do what works for you. I think that's the main thing is, if this is something that you desire to connect with your ancestors, do it in a way that works for you. They came to me through my images, through my drawings, through my paintings. And for you, they may come to you in another way. And so I think just knowing that they will connect with you in the way that you can hear them, in the way that you will understand them. So the way my ancestors come to me might not be the same way your folks come to you, and that's okay. This is not prescriptive, and I think anyone who tells you that connecting with your ancestors is prescriptive, I think they're wrong. They can't tell you how to connect with your people. No. And so I think just having the very bare minimum of an ancestral altar and let it unfold from there. And again, this is a relationship, you're connecting with them in the ancestral realm. And so it's a relationship that you build over time. It's something that you do once a week. Some people do it every day. I know my folks, they're like, you don't need to call us every day. That was one of the things they said in my channeling experience. So that's it. So, what am I doing with all of this? I have something that I'm creating called my ancestral wonderland, and like I said, so all of the images and all of the things that they have asked me to create, that's what I'm making. What will I do with it? I don't know. Some of it might just be for me. I might share it more often. Who knows? I think after I create each piece, I'll probably share it here on this channel. But beyond that, I don't know that it's going to have value to anyone outside of me and my family, but that's okay. It's just something that has meant the world to me and has meant so much to me to be able to connect, with my mom and other ancestors and to just bring it all together. And that has been incredibly valuable for me. So, to wrap all of this up, if you know that you want to connect with your ancestors, I say do it. Keep it simple, and do it over time. Don't expect anything crazy. I think they show up in dreams. I think they show up in images. I think they show up in maybe symbols. They show up in all sorts of ways that are below the neck, sort of an embodied experience in a way that's not necessarily so conscious. It's not necessarily, in your conscious mind. And so they show up in a way that, when you're off guard or you're not so, that you're not expecting them to. At least that's how it's been for me. And I think it's like sort of when you've got your guard down in a certain area where you are a lot more expressive and open, that's probably a way that they're going to come up and show up for you. And so again, what are the things that they liked in this life? Or things that are important to you, that's all the things you can bring to your altar and connect with them. I find that music is a really great way to do that. Singing is another great way to do that, chanting or call and response or whatever it is. I think that's a really great way to connect. And like I said, these are your people and they're there for you. And so, it that to me has brought me a tremendous amount of peace of mind and comfort and just having that love and knowing that, hey, they love me in this life and they love me in the next. And that means a lot to me. So that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about today about the ancestors. Again, if this is something that you want to do, you want to go a little bit deeper with this, let's hop on a connection call. The link is below this video, and I'll tell you all about the 2 hour private retreat that I do with folks. We do some we can talk about creating your ancestral altar, and I do a tarot reading for you. We do some journaling meditations, all sorts of really good stuff, fun stuff. So if this is something you want to delve into, I'd be happy to guide you on that path. And yeah, connect with your folks. That's it. Do it, if for no other reason than to bring your own heart some healing and love and just that feeling of connectedness. If for no other reason than that, although I do believe that our ancestors guide us, that is plenty. So that's all. Thank you so much for